Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, May the 7th, 2021. Story about the late start. For some reason, I couldn't get a live chat to work. It just kept hanging and hanging and hanging. So eventually I had to reboot the computer, which involved opening all these programs afterwards. But the show will begin now. You may hear more ambient noise from outside than you are used to. And the reason for that is because I have the glass door open all of the way because I had to air out this hotel room. Because, well, I'll tell you what happened. Last night, I noticed that in the corridor of the second floor where I reside, there was a very foul odor in it. This morning, when I left my room, I noticed that the stink had become almost unbearable. Now, I've never seen a dead person before or even smelled one, but I've read about it, about what it smells like. And disgusting sweetness, overpowering, disgusting sweetness. So that's what I suspected, and I went down to the clerk at the front desk and told him what I suspected based on the horrible smell. And so I went back to my room, and I was a little shy about leaving it. I heard knocking on the door. This door, a couple doors away from me, and there was no answer. And then when I went out about an hour later, there was a trolley with a body bag on it, and a machine was brought in to clear the air, to draw the stink out of it. But in the meantime, in the hours before, my hotel room had absolutely become inundated with the smell. And I used air freshener. That didn't do any good. So I've had the window open to its fullest extent. Well, the door, floor-to-ceiling door, open to its fullest extent all day, where it will remain open for some hours. An inconvenience to me, but this fellow who died, his problems are obviously much greater than mine. So let's get to it. It's a piece from The Hill by William Maloney called "The Perils of Cultural Self-Loathing, Lessons from Europe." He begins, "It's been 3/4 of a century since the end of the European Civil War, also known as World Wars I and II. Hardly anyone alive has an adult memory of that catastrophic conflict, but our world today remains imprisoned by the legacy of that monumental act of civilizational self-destruction. The self-confident Europe that by every measure had dominated the planet until 1914 was by 1945 reduced to a sea of ruin and rubble, with all assertions of moral and political superiority shattered." I'll just add that my own analysis of what's happened since 1945, not merely in Europe, but in the Western world as a whole, is that based on my reading of James Burnham, that it was simply decided that no alternative elites would be allowed to exist, and that politics came to an end. That henceforth everyone would be compelled to believe the same things, just a question of degree. And furthermore, that disagreement with the elite was close to treason. Maloney continues, claims that this world calamity ended in the triumph of freedom were belied by the fact that the principal victor, the Soviet Union, was a tyranny as murderous in character as the Nazi regime it had overthrown. It was also clear that a conflict that began as a war among nations had been transformed into a battle of ideologies that would continue through 40 plus years of the Cold War, with a battered Europe, half slave and half free, stripped of its empires and influence, permanently overshadowed by the United States and the Soviet Union. Within a single generation, European politics lurched from conservative monarchism to liberal socialism. The creation of the modern welfare or entitlement state was nothing less than a just recompense to people who had loyally supported their armies and governments through the unparalleled horrors of war. The most striking cultural transformation was the near collapse of organized religion. With rare exceptions, since as Poland, a church attendance plunged throughout Europe to all-time lows and never recovered. If religion could offer no explanation to the great catastrophe of the 20th century, answers had to be sought elsewhere. None of the alternative explanations was more perverse than the doctrine that arose among many intellectuals and elite opinion makers more generally, that the disaster that had befallen Europe was a deserved punishment for the original sin of colonialism and its horrible oppression and exploitation of poor people of color worldwide. I'll just add there's a little bit more to it than that. Essentially, beginning after the death of Pope Pius XII in 1958, the Catholic Church embarked upon euthanasia. That's the only way that I can describe it. Maloney continues, the implications of this were enormous. If true, then Europe and Christianity were guilty of terrible crimes. The required corollary of this doctrine was that Western civilization itself must be devalued or even rejected outright as a shameful culture of oppression. To a remarkable extent, this narrative of guilt was widely accepted by Europeans and reinforced in the higher echelons of academia and the media. It fit in perfectly with the blame and condemnation coming from non-Europeans, particularly the adherents of Marxism, for whom the inherent rottenness of Western capitalism and its inevitable collapse long had been bedrock doctrine. As broad sectors of European opinion makers and political actors struggled with these sweeping indictments of European history and values, many embracing an outright cultural self-loathing, this painful saga was further exacerbated by a rising tide of immigration from the formal colonial territories. This immigration element of Europe's post-imperial travails and their attendant moral, political, and demographic ramifications were brilliantly chronicled in Christopher Caldwell's 2009 book, Reflections on the Revolution in Europe, Immigration, Islam, and the West. Then a columnist for Financial Times and contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine, Caldwell's seminal work was described by the Times as the most rigorous and plain-spoken examination of Muslim immigration in Europe to date. The Washington Post said that it was notable for its range synthesis of the literature, analytical rigor, and elegant tone. It is significant to note that the events described above and in Caldwell's book all predate the massive immigration-related upheavals in Europe that arose as the result of the Syrian civil war, the Libyan revolution, and vast human misery throughout the Middle East and North Africa. The experience of Europe should be a cautionary tale for the United States about what happens to a society that is led by its elites when it surrenders itself to self-flagellation and cultural self-loathing by embracing the most perverse possible interpretation of its own history. Yet in light of the current political and cultural furies that threaten to tear America apart, we must conclude that the lessons of Europe have gone unheeded. The philosopher George Santayana warned us that those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Tragically, the United States again appears to be proving the enduring wisdom of these words. And I'm going to go to Caldwell's piece here. Just give me a moment. As I say, I had to start everything from scratch here, and here we go. Christopher Caldwell, whose recent book I praised to the skies on the book club, a year ago or such like, has a piece in the National Review called The Inequality of Equity. Yes, this is crucial to keep in mind at all times, that equity is not the same as equality. It is very different. Equity is more like to the victor go the spoils. Caldwell begins in mid-April. 3 of the new generation of Black women mayors of big cities met virtually at a roundtable sponsored by MIT Sloan School of Management, Lori Lightfoot of Chicago, London Breed of San Francisco, Kim Janey of Boston. One might assume that crisis management was the kind of management they had been invited to pronounce on. Lightfoot, Chicago has become the murder capital of the United States with 774 killings last year, roughly as many as New York and Los Angeles combined, and up 55% from the year before. Breed's San Francisco, cradle of the information age, has in recent years faced a problem out of the Middle Ages, people defecating on sidewalks. 28,000 cases of which came to the attention of the police in 2019. Janey is the newly appointed successor to Marty Walsh, made President Joe Biden's Secretary of Labor. MIT had invited the three women not to interrogate, but to applaud them and to find out how the rest of America's cities might become as equitable as theirs. Equity is the name for a new understanding of racial equality that is now informing public policy making. President Biden issued a burst of executive orders on his first day in office, calling for equity to be placed front and center in everything his administration does. His cabinet ministers, unsurprisingly, allude to equity constantly. If you wanted to be blunt about it, you might call equity a no-excuses imperative to eliminate all collective racial inequalities. There are many such inequalities in our system, and blacks are on the unenviable side of most of them. They possess the fewest financial assets, fare the worst in school, have the hardest time finding work, live the shortest lives, commit the most violent crime, and spend the most time in jail. Equity's proponents, most of them progressive Democrats, say their aim is to ensure that all races share equally in economic growth and get a fair shake in the justice system. Republicans say that Democrats are abandoning equality of opportunity for equality of result. Well, once again, equality of opportunity, don't use that term. It's impossible to achieve. It would require a totalitarian effort to even attempt it. Back to Caldwell. Put that way, equity sounds like a new name for something that Americans have been arguing about for 2 or 3 generations now. Affirmative action, after all, tips the playing field of opportunity in minorities' favor. Diversity is all about managing results. Feminists' equal pay for equal work campaigns might be considered a harbinger of these equity debates. But in 2 ways, the equity movement is radically new. First is in the categorical simplicity of the diagnosis. It views all inequality across groups as illegitimate on its face, as evidence of white racism, in fact. Second is in its tools. Equity doesn't concern itself with more traditional understandings of inequality, differences, say, between bosses and laborers. It is about equality for blacks, as laid out in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and for the various groups from immigrants to transgender people that have come under the Act's protection in the decades since. The power of civil rights law to punish employers and schools, to investigate those suspected of noncompliance, and even to silence detractors has been steadily strengthened by bureaucratic fiat and litigation. Race-conscious rather than race-blind, open to almost any kind of remedial discrimination, equity has brought us to a crossroads. Either our civil rights laws are being overstretched to the point where they are growing intolerable to much of the country, though people remained frightened of doing so, or they're in the process of becoming the supreme law of the land, overriding even the Constitution. And that was the thesis of Caldwell's latest book, that the U.S. Constitution has been supplanted by the civil rights movement. Caldwell continues, Joe Biden, never known for his originality as either a politician or a thinker, is now carrying out a radical redefinition of America's ideas of fairness. This is perhaps not as surprising as it looks. In last year's Democratic primaries, Biden was the compromise candidate of a Democratic establishment that looked on Donald Trump as an existential threat to the nation. Voters, alas, were lukewarm. Biden finished 4th in Iowa, 5th in New Hampshire, and a distant 2nd in Nevada, with the possibly unelectable socialist Bernie Sanders at or near the top in all 3 contests. South Carolina, where the Democratic electorate is almost 60% black, was the party leader's last possible chance to keep Biden in the race. The win he secured there was due wholly to the endorsement and organization of the gentlemanly House Democratic whip, James Clyburn, the state's most experienced politician. That win, in turn, brought heavy pressure for the withdrawal of rival moderates in a position to erode Biden's vote. Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and Michael Bloomberg. Other presidents may have empathized more with Black America or understood it better, but none has ever owned blacks as much as the congenitally loyal Biden. During the campaign, he pledged to nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court, something for which Clyburn said he longs, and his first 3 appellate court nominees have been black women. Should be noticed in passing that Biden's electoral debts are numerous. Though victory helps, it does not wholly solve the problem that he lacks a passionate base within his own party. The consequences is that the White House is now staffed by a fractious junta of party interest groups, feminists here, techies there, billionaire philanthropists up there, voting rights activists down there, held together in variable geometries by Chief of Staff Ron Klain. This arrangement may lead to clashes later on. Right now, it has lent the Biden administration an early dynamism not seen since Lyndon Johnson took office after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And at the core of this dynamism is the idea of equity. Equity is derived from so-called critical race theory, which came to public attention when Donald Trump denounced it as a malign ideology last campaign season, after giving it a home in his administration for 3.5 years, though that is another story. Critical race theory is a varied set of perspectives on a varied set of issues, but there is one thing that seems to run through all of it: non-neutrality. Starting in the 1990s, critical race scholars noticed that color blindness and the level playing field and objective measurements were doing little to close the gaps between blacks and others, and came to repudiate those things as frauds. So, for instance, Kimberlé Crenshaw, a leading theorist, argued in the introduction to the essay collection Critical Race Theory, published in 1995, that, quote, the putatively neutral baseline from which affirmative action is said to represent a deviation is in fact a mechanism for perpetuating the distribution of rights, privileges, and opportunity established under a regime of uncontested white supremacy, unquote. There can be no such thing as colorblindness, the reasoning goes, because the institutions, the structures, and the laws are already rigged in favor of white people, and as immigration has progressed, of other non-black ethnic groups. As I said earlier, equity can be seen as to the victor go the spoils. Caldwell concludes, with COVID as a pretext, equity advocates set up a new system to fill the spots based on zip codes and grades. A plan that will result in a 24% reduction in Asians, an 18% reduction in whites, a 50% increase in blacks, and a 14% increase in Hispanics. We're talking about school placements. One can wish the new students well, but there is a danger in loosening admission standards. It implies that the educational mission of the school has always been a disguised social mission of exclusion, and that very notion delegitimizes the educational mission. As often as not, equity destroys the goods it means to share. Perhaps equity is best thought of as diversity or affirmative action taken to its logical conclusion. We can expect it to function in ways similar to affirmative action, steadily entrenching itself as those who administer it forget the goals they began with. At that point, a temporary program turns into a permanent one, and a new goal enters, no longer to undo racism, but to duck the arduous work that would have to be done if the problem turns out to be more complicated than that. Yes, well, we see the problem that for decades, American politicians, including conservatives, have contended that America is a country all about equality, while forgetting the elephant in the room: affirmative action and set aside. So as Caldwell argues, it is in fact perfectly logical that America would go from equality with extra benefits to a flat out war on white people. Let's have a look at the chat. Greetings to Dan, Don Willis, Palcasso 88, Kyle Free, Chocokin 666, Steve, who quotes Leonard Skinner, and the situation is deteriorating at Kevin's hotel. I'm not certain about this, but I believe that there are homeless people being, that have rooms here, I guess paid for by the civic or provincial government. Hello to Dan, Tom Anderson, Ann Run, Claire Kaw, Buddy. Chocokin 666 says, what does it indicate when capitalism, communism combine to smash a third ideology? Well, you know, the communists used to say back in the last century that communism is 20th century Americanism. And I would say, following that, that Americanism, or globalism as it stands now, is 21st century communism. Okay. Hello to Aslan, to Professor Pohl. Roulette cracked. I thought this episode was about Christopher Cantwell. Dear. Oh, yes. I thought everyone had forgotten about him. Okay, what else do we have here? Parents are getting bolder around here, says Buddy. I don't know what that refers to. Roulette Crack said, I dreamt Kevin had a bug-out bag and we were about to escape to our bug-out location. Okay. Don Will says, funny that Kevin smelled it first, reported it, and posited the idea KMG starts eliminating noisy neighbors. No. There are quite a few old men who live in this place, and they make very little noise at all. I can't really complain that this hotel is internally noisy. It's externally noisy because of the madhouse across the street. Jokin666 says body needs to be deceased quite a bit for emitting that grade of odor. Well, yes, the fellow at the desk told me that he never saw the man who lived in that room very often. So when he hadn't seen him for, I guess, a few days, he didn't, think anything amiss of it. He told me that, and I thought, well, where was he? How much food had he stored in the room? There's not much, there's a mini fridge in all these rooms, and there's not much that you can keep in that. Maybe he was living on crackers. If you've seen it, any thoughts on Abel Ferrara's film, The King of New York? Well, completely over the top, like all of his films. I thought it was quite vigorous. I like Christopher Walken in it. So let's get back to it here. Oh, yes. So government spending, well, in Canada and Britain, and especially in the United States, is going to solve all the problems. Apparently not. This is from CNBC. April's expected hiring boom goes bust as non-farm payroll gain falls well short of estimates. Hiring was a huge letdown in April, with non-farm payrolls increasing by much less than expected, 266,000, and the unemployment rate rose to 6.1% amid an escalating shortage of available workers. Oh, is that what it is? Dow Jones estimates had been for 1 million new jobs and an unemployment rate of 5.8%. Of course, as you know, these unemployment rates don't count the people who've given up looking for work. And last time I checked, that number was 90 million Americans, something like that. Many economists have been expecting an even higher jobs number amid signs that the U.S. economy was roaring back to life. There was more bad news. March's originally estimated total of 916,000 was revised down to 770,000, though February saw an upward revision to 536,000 from 468,000. However, markets had only a mild reaction to the bad news, a sign that investors expect the Federal Reserve to keep its ultra-easy policies in place and believe that the big miss was likely a short-term phenomenon. What else are they going to say? Are they going to say that the United States is bust, that it's bankrupt? I see that Janet Yellen was saying that, considering an increase in interest rates, maybe in the future. I've been hearing this now for over a decade, and it is not going to happen. Because if interest rates were reduced more than trivially, the economy would implode almost immediately. If interest rates were to increase, 2, 3, 4 points, suddenly governments would be unable to pay the interests on the massive amounts of money that they owe. But some people are doing all right. Apparently to Terrence Jeffrey at CNS News, federal, state, and local governments in the United States increased their employment by a combined 48,000 workers in April, according to numbers released by the BLS. From March to April, the number of workers employed by government in the U.S. climbed from 21,543,000 to 21,591,000. Local government employment increased by 32,000 and state government employment increased by 7,000, with federal government employment increasing by 9,000. The long-term trend has been for government employment to increase in the United States, but there was a precipitous drop in government employment in the United States in 2020 when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Here's a question for you. It's a question I've raised before, but I think it's an interesting one. If these civil servants don't have to come into work, why are they employed? Of course, I could ask the same thing of teachers. But, as you know, the goal, the dream of teachers is to be paid, and instead of getting, 3 months vacation a year, get 12 months vacation a year. We have a similar situation in Canada. The Canadian economy lost 207,000 jobs in April. This is blamed on a spike on COVID-19 variant cases. New variants led to renewed public health restriction and raised concerns about longer-term economic consequences from the pandemic. Now we're having concerns about longer-term economic consequences when all of the governments in Canada, federal government, all the provincial governments decided to smash their economies. The unemployment rate rose to 8.1% from 7.5% in March. Significantly, it would have been 10.5% had it included in calculations Canadians who wanted to work but didn't search for a job. In other words, the unemployment figures in both Canada and the United States are bogus. They don't count unemployment. But perhaps you knew that already. And where are we moving on to now? I got to be careful about this. There's a man who has been active in Canadian politics for decades, named Warren Kinsella, also a journalist. He is the only man to have ever sued me. Amusingly, largely because I quoted back what he had written to me. I quoted this back in 2 magazines, or 3 magazines, actually. Maxime Bernier uttered racist slur about Jagmeet Singh, according to statement filed in court. Affidavit was filed in connection with defamation suit against political strategist Warren Kinsella. People's Party of Canada leader Maxime Bernier once discounted NDP leader Jagmeet Singh's chances of winning a seat in the House of Commons by saying he'd, quote, never get elected with that rag on his head, unquote, according to an affidavit filed recently in an Ottawa court case. In a separate affidavit, however, Bernier says that he's not a racist, and the affidavit is the only eyewitness account of him supposedly saying something racist, filed by the lawyer for political strategist Warren Kinsella. Bernier said Kinsella was hired to paint him and the People's Party of Canada as racist to draw support away from his fledgling party during the last election. In October 2019, it was reported that Kinsella's Daisy Group, that's his PR spiv firm, have been hired in the months prior to the 2019 federal election to mount Project Cactus, a campaign to draw attention to xenophobic or racist comments made by People's Party of Canada candidates or their supporters. At the time, a source said that the Daisy Group had been hired by the Conservative Party of Canada. The Conservative Party of Canada. Kinsella has been identified as a liberal his entire life and rather made his bones portraying conservatives and their supporters as being, well, troglodytes. In a recent affidavit, however, Kinsella said that the client was a lawyer who was a member of the Conservative Party, not the party itself. Well, I wonder where the money came from. Did the lawyer pony this up out of his own pocket. In an affidavit filed by Kinsella's lawyer dated April 15th, former conservative communications advisor Matthew Conway describes what he said was an incident involving Bernier in February 2018, when Bernier was still a Conservative Party critic. Yeah. You can find pictures of this man on the internet, and I will just leave it at that. Conway, that is. I will leave it at that. So, it's not a surprise to find out that the United States Department of Justice believes that ensuring election integrity is, wait for it, racist. Jim Kunstler writes today, "The truth is surely baseless." He begins by quoting from 2 days ago a conversation on MSNBC between Rachel Maddow and Lawrence O'Donnell. Maddow says, "I think we should see this as the Justice Department putting these whack jobs in Arizona, forgive me, on notice, that what they're doing is something they're not going to be allowed to do for very longer." O'Donnell responded, "I think whack jobs is now in the New York Times style sheet for describing what's happening in Arizona. Ho, ho, ho." Kunstler comments, "What you're seeing now with the DC establishment are desperate moves to keep the suspicious and yet more pissed off public from understanding the government crime spree of the past 5 years that started with the Obama gang using the Department of Justice to disable and terminate Donald Trump and the threat he represented to the network of special privilege and money known as the Swamp, which has managed to put a deep fake president in office as a last resort to protect itself. The urgent problem: how to squash the Arizona vote audit by branding it as an outlaw action, even though it was ordered under law by the Arizona State Senate. Having failed to stop it so far using the Swamp's lawfare cadres in the Arizona courts, the DOJ has called in its Civil Rights Division to get her done, pretending that it will be an offense against people of color if auditors seek to know whether write-in votes correspond to actual addresses and other particulars of election procedure they may have violated. Of course, the Arizona business is only one leak in a giant dike of official deceit built up over the years to keep any truth from deluging the DC lowlands. Other leaks are springing in New Hampshire and Michigan, with a wormhole opening up in Georgia. It will be interesting to see if cable TV news can keep painting the truth as something against the public interest. As many times as they style the redacted fraud and conspiracy theory and baseless, the public relations arm of the Democratic Party still has a hard slog convincing at least 80 million Americans that a detailed review of a contested vote is a bad thing. Meanwhile, other breaches in the dike threaten to flow the low-lying swamp zone with existential threats. The DOJ, the FBI, and the other agencies are so saturated in crime that the only feasible damage control they can do is haplessly commit more crimes against the common decency of the Republic to cover up their old crimes. Hence the seizure of Rudy Giuliani's phones and computers in a 6 a.m. raid last week, leading to the incriminating disclosure that the FBI secretly accessed Giuliani's iCloud account to spy on his correspondence with Trump in the fall of 2019 during the first impeachment preliminaries. Are you kidding me? Who gave the order for that? To violate basic attorney-client privilege during a legal proceeding of the highest order? And what was behind the Giuliani raid? Among other things, the horror show of corruption in the Ukraine, starring but not limited to Joe and Hunter Biden in their ceaseless quest for grift, but also featuring many of the origins of the Russiagate hoax and its spin-offs, plus the involvement of State Department personnel such as Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch and Deputy George Kent, double plus the shady activities of George Soros and his Atlantic Council in seditious activity working hand-in-hand with the CIA's whistleblower, name redacted, to damage Trump, who was impeached for simply inquiring about what was going on in the Ukraine. Giuliani had to conduct his own investigation into all that for the obvious reason that the usual U.S. agencies who would ordinarily investigate official misconduct were actually perpetrating it: the DOJ, FBI, CIA, and the State Department. And who at the DOJ now might be behind the current effort to neutralize Giuliani? Try Lisa Monaco, the new Deputy Attorney General, formerly one of Barack Obama's chief White House fixers, i.e. an attorney detailed to shutting down investigations and covering the tracks left by questionable operations, and a protege of former CIA Director John Brennan. Is the weak and pliable Attorney General Merrick Garland fronting for her running the DOJ now? Joe Biden is going to need a whole lot of fixing. And is Lisa Monaco actually still reporting to Barack Obama? He can also probably use a fix or two. Who knows what's coming down the pike? Just maybe a loaded semi driven by the nearly forgotten John Durham. MSNBC might have made an unforced error on Wednesday, scripting 10 o'clock troll Lawrence O'Donnell to diss former Attorney General William Barr. Some jive about Barr trying to mess with special counsel Robert Mueller's efforts back in 2018 to nail Trump on an obstruction of justice rap. Is this the time to piss off Barr? You have to wonder. Is it possible that the FBI concealed its possession of the Hunter Biden laptop from Barr during those 2019 days of impeachment when Trump was attempting to mount a defense for making a phone call to the Ukraine? Who might be responsible for hiding that, if it were so? Yes, and we have more interesting news coming up about that. But before we get to that, this is from the Washington Post. Jacqueline Pizer, accused Capitol rider had fox-itis, his attorney says. He started believing what was being fed to him. In the 6 months leading up to the insurrection, no, it wasn't an insurrection. You're lying to us, as usual, at the U.S. Capitol. Anthony Antonio spent his days watching Fox News, a habit that actually made him ill. His attorney told the D.C. federal magistrate judge on Thursday. His ailment, fox-itis, his attorney said. He became hooked with what I call fox mania. In the virtual hearing, which went awry when another alleged Capitol rioter interrupted with obscenities, Antonio's attorney, Joseph Hurley, claimed that Fox News' decision to regularly air then-President Donald Trump's false claims of mass election fraud contributing to Antonio's decision to participate in the insurrection. So this is the new line, that watching Fox News makes you a traitor. I recall Fox News pretty much being scared off by Trump, that they decided, no, this is too dangerous. We do not want to get into this. But back to the Biden family. And it's grifting. This is an exclusive from the Daily Mail. Your doggy chain necklace is waiting for you. Hunter Biden's emails reveal his close relationship with the Chinese-American secretary who worked for him when he went into business with the man he called, quote, the chief spy of China, unquote. The mysterious young assistant wrote the president's son flirty messages, sent him opposition research for Joe's White House run, and encouraged him to draw funds from the company accounts when the joint venture collapsed, and even ended up with Hunter's military dog tags. In 2017, Hunter went into business with Patrick Ho, Secretary General of Chinese oil giant CEFC. Hunter described Ho in a call recording on his abandoned laptop as the spy chief of China, and the Chinese businessman was later surveilled by U.S. law enforcement as a foreign intelligence threat before he was convicted of bribery in 2018. After launching his multi-million-dollar joint venture with CEFC, Hunter was assigned a 29-year-old Chinese-American assistant, Jiki Bao, who quickly struck up a close and intriguing relationship with her Biden boss. At first, emails show the New York-based Bao diligently scheduled flights, hotels, and even doctor's appointments for the president's son. But mysteriously, the young assistant also sent him opposition research to help Joe Biden's 2020 election bid, urged him to take cash from the joint venture's accounts as the business collapsed, and wrote flirty and personal messages. Oh, so in effect then, the Chinese government was providing opposition research for Joe Biden's 2020 campaign. While Hunter had photos of Bao on his laptop, Daily Mail could not find any explicit photos or videos of his assistant. Oh, here's a message from Bao. Hey, Hunter, how are you? I just got a message from Mervyn about your inquiry of your necklace. I still have it locked in my drawer at my New York apartment and promised to keep it for you. I'm out of town at the moment. I will reach out to you and return it along with a document bag I had prepared for you as soon as I get back to New York City. Take care and catch up soon. Miss you. Yes. Okay. So this was, of course, one of the very biggest stories of the 2020 campaign about Hunter Biden's relationship with the governments of the Ukraine and China, as well as other countries, and the allegations that Hunter Biden was kicking back money from these grifts to his father, who happens to be Joe Biden. This, with the notable exception of the New York Post, this story was completely quashed by the regime media. Completely quashed. Now, why would that be? Well, because the regime media knew that the more people knew about this, the less likely they would be to vote for Joe Biden. We have all of these stories from the fallout of the announced divorce between Bill Gates and his wife, Melissa. I should caution listeners that this is true in pretty much all divorces, especially celebrity divorces, divorces where there's a lot of money on the line. That stories start appearing that he was an absolute bastard and she was an absolute bitch. And it's obvious where these stories were coming from. But nonetheless, this is from the Daily Beast. Lachlan Cartwright. Melinda Gates met with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein alongside her husband Bill in New York City, and soon after said she was furious at the relationship between the two men, according to people familiar with the situation. The previously unreported meeting occurred at Epstein's Upper East Side mansion in September 2013. On the same day, the couple accepted the Lasker Bloomberg Public Service Award at the Pierre Hotel and were photographed alongside then-Mayor Mike Bloomberg. The meeting would prove a turning point for Gates's relationship with Epstein, the people familiar with the matter say, as Melinda told friends after the encounter how uncomfortable she was in the company of the wealthy sex offender and how she wanted nothing to do with him. Gates's friendship with Epstein, who for years was accused of molesting scores of underage girls, still haunts Melinda, according to friends of the couple who spoke to the Daily Beast this week in light of the pair's divorce announcement. The Daily Beast has learned that financial and public relations specialists had been feverishly working on details of the pair's split for weeks before the couple announced their divorce on Monday. You know, George Stephanopoulos went to a fancy dinner at Epstein's fabulous mansion in Manhattan, and it is fabulous. I don't know whether you've ever seen pictures. It's one of the most impressive private residences in the whole of New York City. Somehow, George Stephanopoulos, he went to this after Epstein was released from prison. He didn't know anything about Jeffrey Epstein, apparently. Top newsman, George Stephanopoulos, former Clinton employee, George Stephanopoulos, knew nothing at all about Jeffrey Epstein. Here we go again with Bloomberg. Yes, I'm just trying to open a link. I don't want to identify bicycles or boats or motorcycles in order to get to your site, Bloomberg. This is from Bloomberg Business Week. Brad Stone, the untold story of how Jeff Bezos beat the tabloids. When a gossip rag went after the CEO, he retaliated with the brilliant efficiency he used to build his business empire. In an exclusive excerpt from the new book, Amazon Unbound, comes an unrivaled tale of money, sex, and power. I found this out from reading Ryan Landry today. He writes, wild theory I saw yesterday is that Bezos and Gates are stage managing divorces to liquidate stock as our markets hit a top without spooking the market. Interesting, no? Oh, more on the DOJ and how corrupt it is and how the fix was in for Derek Chauvin and the other cops in Minneapolis from the start. This is from the Associated Press. A federal grand jury has indicted the 4 former Minneapolis police officers involved in George Floyd's arrest and death, accusing them of willfully violating the black man's constitutional rights as he was restrained, face down on the pavement and gasping for air. A 3-count indictment unsealed Friday names Derek Chauvin, Thomas Lane, Jay Kung, and Tu Thao. Yes, so once again, not double jeopardy, not at all, because Chauvin was convicted of manslaughter and murder, but not first-degree murder, on 3 counts. But the Justice Department is not indicting Chauvin and the other 3 officers for this. No, 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 no. They are indicting them for police brutality. What's the context of this police brutality? Kneeling on George Floyd's neck until he was dead as the other 3 officers watched. So as you can see, it is not at all the same charge. And so all of this talk of double jeopardy is completely and utterly baseless. Okay, let's go back to the chat here. Aslan says Daily Mail also publishes pics of the white supremacists attacking Asians. Ahem. U.S. media looks away. Well, you know, regardless of the color of the skin of the people who are attacking Asians, typically quite old Asians with regularity, it's all the fault of white supremacy. I mean, come on, get with the plan. Hello to Dubareus. Notice how his girlfriend Ghislaine has dropped out of sight. Well, she's in prison. I hear talk of a plea bargain. Although, what kind of plea bargain is it if she's going to spend the rest of her life in prison? Aslan says Hunter Biden is a meth head. Well, no, he has triumphed over his demons, as his father told us. You can't say the man's name. Go ahead, try it. It will auto-delete. No, please don't. Okay. LOL at Hunter. What a cock, says Jay Miller. Okay. Yes. Joe Biden still tells us to the day. He said in 2020 just how proud of his son he was. Well, you know, when he was talking up his son to the skies, I'm reminded of the old adage, hang together or hang separately. Has anyone seen Rachel Maddow and Chris Hayes in the same room? Asked Palpcasso 88. Okay, I'm not going to repeat this from Ann Run about Rachel Maddow. It just it's curious, you know. Physiognomy is real, as you know, and you see this again and again. There's a very famous person in Hollywood involved in TV production, and when these people were straight, they looked one way, and then when they became lesbian, their very physiognomy changed. And it's not just a question of styling, you know, it's a question of the mien, the expression of the face, the gaze, that it goes from being feminine to being masculine. Tweety Bird, someone says that emoji looks like Trudeau. Head McNeck says, hey, everyone, I guess we're reviewing Ed Chang's book today. I wonder if Kevin remembers him and Luke interviewing him. No, I don't. Perhaps you could give me more information about that, Head McNeck. What did he call himself on the show? Okay, what is coming up next? Oh, yep. Here we go. Back to the salt mines. This is from Shanifa Nasser at CBC. Ontario vowed to investigate horrific deaths in long-term care. Now it says that didn't happen. Okay. And there were a lot of horror stories about how people in long-term care homes were treated in the summer of last year. We're not hearing those horror stories anymore for an obvious reason, because these care homes are overwhelmingly staffed with people who are they're not white and they are not Canadian. They fled in terror from their jobs after neglecting their patients horribly. Let's see. And in light of all this, yes, nearly 1 year ago, as the first detailed picture emerged of the true scale of the horror faced by residents of Ontario's long-term care system during the pandemic, a visibly emotional Premier Doug Ford vowed there's going to be justice. Patients with ulcers, with soiled sheets, left bedbound as COVID-19 tore through homes, dehydration, cockroaches, and staff moving unit to unit in contaminated gear. Those were just some of the unsettling images contained in the report. In the face of it all, the Premier vowed a full investigation with the details to be turned over to police, who could lay criminal charges if warranted. The government has already begun an active investigation, the province said in a news release last May. Now it turns out that didn't happen. During a news conference Wednesday, Solicitor General Sylvia Jones told reporters in response to a question by a QP briefing reporter, investigations would not happen at a provincial level or a ministry level. That would be the purview and the responsibility of either the local police departments, or in some cases, they would refer it to another division, another police operation. In a news release announcing an investigation last year, the province said one death had been referred to the Office of the Chief Coroner for investigation. Specific critical incidents in the report were referred to the Ministry of Long-Term Care's Inspections Branch. This used to be the sort of thing that people would resign over, or they'd be sacked. But no, not anymore. A story from the Telegraph, almost a third. Okay, hang on a second. Almost a third. I had this all set up before I had to reboot. Just bear with me here. And I should have this up shortly. Sorry about this. Okay. Nope, that didn't work. Come on. Almost a third of recent COVID deaths in England and Wales are not from the virus. That's essentially the story, and that's as far as I can go because it would take too long to get it up. There's a long think piece by Kevin Smith at the very valuable site called offguardian.org, deleting the reset, the imminent struggle ahead. He begins, a while ago, I wrote an article explaining my journey of learning towards the Great Reset agenda. In that piece, I said I thought this horror show would continue for some time, but ultimately it would fail, but at great cost to our society and to all of us. More recently, I've been researching information about the new vaccines. Vaccines is in scare quotes. And like others, now seriously wonder if this is part of something sinister and perhaps even more of a threat to our very existence. As I say, this is quite a long piece, but he compiles a great deal of information about what has happened over the last year and all this talk of building back better and what that means. What are the chances of stopping their power grab? That's the Davos crowd, the Build Back Better crowd. Reiner, who's one of the people that he quotes, is quite hopeful that this could happen and a better world could emerge and away from the globalism which has created the world's problems. He says that if we fail, it could be the end of humanity, so we can't fail. I share this assessment and cautious optimism. Finally, the author says, I think the globalist cults may have bitten off more than they can chew at once. Due to the overall agenda being a shared goal among different interests, but combined with many smaller agendas within these groups, which sometimes conflict, I think it's hard to pull off. I believe the courts, in theory, offer remedies, so long as they are independent, or there's a chance at least the globalists may back off or settle if they see the evidence against them is overwhelming and awareness growing. Whistleblowers could start coming forward more, perhaps caused by unexpected event or opposition which the elites haven't factored in, or further mistakes they make. So there's a strong psychological element to this battle. Likewise, many more people than we realize now could be on the verge of waking up, and a spark somewhere, perhaps major civil unrest, could cause contagion. The elites could lose their nerve, become too greedy. Divisions and infighting could follow, leading to self-destruction. But I believe the elites could double down with further generated crises, food chain problems, power cuts, new variants, and other distractions. There could be evil that we have not factored in. The tragedy for humanity is if people don't wake up now, they may not realize until they are in the nightmare where they will own nothing and be expected to be happy or far worse. Well, as we know, Neil Ferguson of Imperial College London has admitted that what he wanted and what like-minded people wanted was a Chinese-like regime in Britain and the rest of the world. That is to say, the government says jump and everyone says, how high? Why do we have to jump? Stop asking questions or else. And Ferguson admitted that he didn't think they would be allowed to get away with it. But guess what? They were. And since they have gotten away with COVID, what else do they have in mind? It could be food chain problems, power cuts, to add to the new variants. You know that these new variants are going to bring about a biological Fukushima. Wow, that sounds bad. I suppose if you're talking to people who actually knew what Fukushima was, I suppose, Hiroshima, more to the point, although I suspect there's a great many people around today, even college graduates who've never heard of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. At Lockdown Skeptics, the maddening mystery of Imperial, there's a great segue, Imperial's invulnerable reputation, despite its dire record of failed model predictions. Philip Magnus in AIER has crunched the numbers and shown how poor Imperial College's modeling has been at predicting the outcomes of the COVID-19 pandemic under different policy responses in every country of the world. Well, 189 of them. Yet for some unexplained reason, Neil Ferguson and the rest of the Imperial team remained respected authorities on epidemic modeling and management. How about that? Magnus has put together a table of all the countries with the predictions Imperial College London made for them and their actual outcomes. The results should be fatal for the reputation of anyone whose job it is to make accurate predictions of the future course of event, but not ICL, it seems, whose credibility appears to be invulnerable despite repeated and consistent failure. Magnus wonders why. Why is Ferguson, who has a long history of absurdly exaggerated modeling predictions, still viewed as a leading authority on pandemic forecasting? And why is the ICL team still advising governments around the world on how to deal with COVID-19 through its flawed modeling approach? In March 2020, ICL sold its credibility for future delivery. That future has arrived, and the results are not pretty. I was talking to someone the other day about why this obsession with modeling. Well, my explanation was, there's modeling, and then there is the evidence, data-based evidence. See, the advantage of modeling is that modeling supposedly foretells the future, whereas opposed, with data-based evidence, you have to wait for the data to come in before you can come up with hypotheses. No, but modeling, it predicts the future. These same people who would scoff at crystal balls have no problem with modeling, despite failure after failure after failure. What else do we have here? Cautious resumption of international travel as only 12 countries are added to Britain's green list. And Bolsonaro refuses to lock down. Cases in Brazil decline anyway. What was it, like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? We were told that everyone in Brazil was going to die. Guess what? That's not going to. Now we're told that everyone in India is going to die. Let's see. This is from Toby Young, who says, we're publishing a third postcard from our Brazilian correspondent today in which he explains that infections, hospitalizations, and deaths are declining across Brazil in spite of President Bolsonaro's stubborn refusal to lock down in the face of overwhelming pressure, which is just as well, says our correspondent, because it's impossible to lock down the population of Brazil. The state governors know the futility of lockdown, even as they scream for one. How do we know? Because they won't impose lockdowns in their own states. They know such measures would be unenforceable and devastating for them at the polls, as well as for their local economies. So they instead come up with the weakest restrictions possible, just enough to say they are doing something, and then blame the government for why they can't do more. The whole thing is a farcical game. More good news today. If only Boris Johnson was paying attention to data. England's coronavirus cases have halved in a month. The R rate is still below 1, and the number of people in hospital has dropped below 1,000 for the first time since September. But the lockdown continues. Under 40s to be offered alternative to AstraZeneca jab. Golly, I hope it's not the Johnson & Johnson jab. Okay, immunity passports. I don't want to talk about that. Too depressing. Let's go to Alex Berenson's site. See what he has to say. Latest from him. He boasts, I was 6 to 12 months ahead in front of public health and the media about the safety of being outside, the lack of risk to kids and needs for schools to open, the lack of proof lockdowns help, the evidence SARS-CoV-2 came from a lab accident. They'll figure out vaccines eventually. And everyone who has read this feed or the booklets knows it. Thus, the attacks don't matter. And I'm not always right. I was wrong about the possibility of reaching herd immunity at low levels of transmission. I didn't say we had, but I did think it was possible. Nope. Oh, a response from Annabelle Kling. You will be disappointed. They have never admitted the truths about childhood vaccines and won't do it for COVID vax either. Wish it weren't so. Welcome to our community who can't unsee the truth. In today's IT list, vaccine additions, in RNA, out DNA, in profits, out intellectual property, in blood clots, out miscarriages, in efficacy, out safety, in saying you'll get vaccinated, out getting vaccinated. Nate Silver had tweeted, maybe instead of trying to heroically interpret ambiguous survey data, we should look directly at the variable of interest. How many people are getting vaccinated? It underwent a huge nonlinear plunge timed exactly to the J&J pause and has never recovered. Berenson comments in English, because of social pressure, people are afraid to tell pollsters they aren't going to get vaccinated, but empty vaccine clinics don't lie. Crazy thought. There's a final thought for Alex Berenson today. Crazy thought, the US government should spend a little less time trying to steal the mRNA vaccines and give them away, and a little more time figuring out if they are actually safe. I don't have the latest on the London election. Let's see, London mayoral election. Let's see if I can get it here from Twitter. I told you yesterday that Sean Bailey, who is the man who is not allowed to lose, apparently was catching up to Sadiq Khan. But the latest that I have seen was that they were neck and neck. Neck and neck. But worse news from the for the Labour Party, just absolutely shocking news. I mean, is the Labour Party disintegrating? There was a by-election in the constituency of Hartlepool in the northeast of England. Just to give you some context, in the 2017 election, and that was only 4 years ago, the Labour candidate won with 52.5% of the vote. Okay. In the 2019 election, the Labour candidate, same fellow, Mike Hill, won with 37.7% of the vote. In the by-election this week, The Conservative candidate, Jill Mortimer, took 51.9% of the vote, and the Labour candidate, Paul Williams, took 28.7% of the vote. 28.7. So it's like 24% drop in the space of 4 years. This is absolutely shocking. So what can account for that? Well, Harry Howard in Mail Online says residents of Hartlepool were quick to give their views after hearing of Jill Mortimer's historic by-election win Friday. The Conservative candidate stormed to victory with a majority of 6,940 votes, ending Labour's 57-year hold on the County Durham town. Reacting to the news, one local said Labour would have to climb to the moon and back to recoup what had been lost, while others spoke of disillusionment with the party. Another praised Prime Minister Boris Johnson for visiting during the campaign, saying the trips showed he cares. But a third resident, a retired primary school teacher, said she was appalled by the result. So let's get this straight. Boris Johnson has been an absolute disaster as prime minister, and yet his party crushed the Labour Party, which has a new leader who is not Jeremy Corbyn. Perhaps this might have something to do with, I don't know, for the past, I don't know how many years, the Labour Party has been engaged in this civil war over anti-Semitism. That the Labour Party is anti-Semitic. No, we're not anti-Semitic. How can we root out anti-Semitism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? It appears these internal purges are not a vote winner. Now some news from the Vatican. This is another example of something that was told to me a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, they're just trolling. I know how this works. You give a list of people, and then you add some absurd people at the end. That's the joke. I've made this joke, variations on this joke, many times on the air and in print. This is from the Associated Press. Vatican conference features Fauci, Francis, and Aerosmith. Aerosmith. You remember them? They were a band that first became big in the 1970s, the early 1970s, and then they had a rather unexpected comeback in the mid-1990s where they became huge again. But in any event, the CEOs of vaccine makers Pfizer and Moderna joined cardinals, academics, and the lead guitarist of Aerosmith in opening a unique Vatican conference on COVID-19, other global health threats, and how science, solidarity, and spirituality can address them. The 3-day online conference, which began Thursday and Saturday with a virtual audience with Pope Francis, was planned well before the pandemic erupted last year. Fauci, the immunologist who leads the U.S. pandemic response, opened the meeting by saying the pandemic had confirmed to him that faith and science are constantly evolving. Wait a minute, I thought that science was cast in stone. That's all we've heard for the last year. And that scientists in particular must humbly admit that they don't have all the answers all the time. What is Tony Fauci having a come to Jesus moment in Rome? One answer the director of the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases said he did have was that the key to overcoming current vaccine hesitancy is pairing the right medical message with the right messenger. You have someone who's a deeply religious person who will listen to their clergy. That's different than me with a suit going into an area telling people to do something. Fauci was referring to the religiously inspired resistance to taking COVID-19 vaccines that were indirectly developed using lines of cells derived from aborted fetuses. The Vatican has declared that all COVID-19 vaccines are not only morally licit, but that people have a moral responsibility to get the jabs to protect others. Apparently, the list of 7 deadly sins has been reduced to 1, not getting the jab. The multidisciplinary conference was originally scheduled to take place at the Vatican in May 2020, but was postponed a year and eventually put online. The virtual format, however, has allowed for an even greater variety of participants. A Harvard neuroscientist is leading a conversation about brain health and rock stars with Aerosmith guitarist Joe Perry. What are they going to discuss? How damaging cocaine is to your brain? Soprano Renee Fleming is participating in a panel discussion on the role of music in treating cardiac patients. I quite like Renee Fleming, at least as a singer. It's sad to see her wrapped up in this, but I've seen her making, Biden videos or the like. I shouldn't be surprised. Supermodel Cindy Crawford. Cindy Crawford hasn't been a supermodel for decades, but never mind that. Has a slot to talk about beauty from the inside out. I wonder if these schedulers at the Vatican did some research into Cindy Crawford and all of the incredible and rather nasty things said about her personal life. And Chelsea Clinton is teaming up with an Italian public health official to promote equal access to health care. I'm reminded of something once attributed to the Duke of Wellington. I've never seen such a lot of bad hats in my life. Oh, yes, I was quite pleased to see this story, and is from the Wall Street Journal. And it is by Robert Bryce. Wind turbines are popular in theory. Gallup data show about 70% of Americans want more emphasis on wind energy. Plenty of politicians like the idea too. President Biden's proposed energy efficiency and clean electricity standard calls for tens of thousands of wind turbines. But where exactly will all those turbines be built? The question matters because local governments across the country are rejecting wind energy projects. Since 2015, about 300 government entities from Vermont to Hawaii have rejected or restricted wind projects. In March, the select board in, this is a tough one, Scituate, Massachusetts, ordered a wind turbine in the coastal town to be shut down at night from mid-May to mid-October. The problem, according to the Boston Globe, complaints from neighbors who say they can't sleep at night because of the noise. The planning board in Foster, Rhode Island, voted 5-1 on April 7th to ban wind turbines. The board took action after hearing from residents of Portsmouth, Rhode Island, who had turbines built near their homes. The Valley Breeze newspaper reported that Portsmouth residents warned the board about their experiences complaining about constant noise disturbances, vibrations, and loss in home values from turbines in their neighborhood. These aren't isolated examples. John Ridgey, a town councilman in Yates, New York, has been fighting a proposed 200 megawatt wind project for 7 years. He told me his communities and others are fighting to keep our lands free from environmentally destructive, culture-killing, and unwanted industrial renewable energy projects. These land use conflicts are the binding constraint on the expansion of renewable energy development in the U.S. These conflicts are coming to the fore. At the same time, the Biden administration is pushing a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure package that includes tens of billions of dollars in new spending on wind and solar energy, as well as the construction of thousands of miles of high-voltage transmission lines. Do you know that the building of these wind terminals is a big carbon footprint? And of course, carbon is mankind's eternal enemy. It has to do with the many, many, many tons of concrete which are necessary to build these turbines. And production of concrete is a big carbon emitter. Not that I give a toss, but other people do. Back to Bryce. Some of the fiercest fights against big wind, I like that, big wind, are happening in the blue estates. Good luck building a wind turbine in Vermont, home of Bernie Sanders, one of the Senate's loudest proponents of renewable energy. In New York, so many communities are rejecting wind and solar projects that Governor Andrew Cuomo's administration recently pushed through regulations that will give Albany officials authority to override the objections of local communities and issue permits for large renewable projects. I don't want to go all Edward Abbey on you, because that would get me shut down. But for some reason, the name Edward Abbey popped to mind. In California, wind turbines are so difficult to site that most developers have simply given up trying to build new projects in the state. The backlash against the renewable industry provides another example of the growing social divide over climate change and how much each American will be required to do to slow it. These fights are about red versus blue, rural versus urban, and big business versus small town America. Well, as I say, this is all very good news. Bryce concludes, paving rural America with forests of giant wind turbines and oceans of solar panels won't solve climate change. It will, however, cost trillions of dollars, blight landscapes, kill untold numbers of bats and birds, make people sick, and lead to more economic pain in rural towns and counties. I thought we were in favor of birds. I thought we loved birds. I thought one of the reasons that cats had to be kept indoors is because they kill birds. Never mind that the urban environment allows many more birds to live than they would, not in urban environments because of all of the food that is disposed therein. But no, a very good news story, and I'm so pleased to see it. I'm going to be talking about gossip, the book club, in a few minutes, because Rome was all about gossip. But a story from Dartmouth News tells us that gossip isn't all bad. A Dartmouth study shows it creates social connections and allows for indirect learning. When you hear people railing about misinformation and disinformation on social media, this is really, it's really kind of a anti-gossip initiative, because gossip isn't top down. The reason why people are so much more pliable than they used to be, the reason why governments can get away with COVID-19 panic, hysteria, the sanitary dictatorship, because information used to be horizontal, now it's vertical, top down. Gossip is often considered socially taboo and dismissed for its negative tone, but a Dartmouth study illustrates some of its merits. Gossip enables social connection and enables learning about the world indirectly through other people's experiences, the researchers found. How about that? Gossip is a complex form of communication that is often misunderstood, says Eshin Jolly, a postdoctoral researcher in the Computational Social Affective Neuroscience Laboratory, who co-authored the study with Luke Chang, an assistant professor of psychological and brain sciences and director of the COSAN lab. It can be a means of social and substantive connection beyond its typical negative connection, says Jolly. Jolly and Chang were curious about why people in their personal and professional lives spend so much time exchanging information about themselves and other people, and sought to determine why people gossip and what function it serves. They created an online game to examine the role of gossip and how it manifests as information becomes more uncertain within the game. In 6-person groups, participants played 10 rounds of the game together. In each round, players were given $10 and could choose to keep the money or invest any portion of it in a group fund that was multiplied by 1.5 and divided equally among the players. The game creates an inherent tension between selfish free riding and cooperative behavior, and is considered what researchers refer to as a public goods game. Under some restrictions, in some conditions, information was restricted so that participants could only observe the behavior of a few other players in the game. Our inspiration was creating a lifelike scenario in which you're a member of a community and affected by the actions of all other community members, most of whom you rarely observe and engage with directly, Jolly explained. Yes, so this game proved, according to the study, that by exchanging information with others, gossip is a form of forming relationships. It involves trust and facilitates a social bond that is reinforced as further communication takes place. Let's talk about the Eagles and how much I hate them. I hate them just as much as the dude in the Big Lebowski, and I always have. I'll talk about why specifically in a moment. There's a somewhat disappointing piece on The Ringer by Elizabeth Nelson, the case against the Eagles. 50 years after their first release, the country rock titans, led by Don Henley and the late Glenn Frey, still loom large in American music. Their hits still get play, and their sound is a precursor to modern Nashville. But has this biggest of bands aged well? A panel of experts weighs the case. So she goes on to say how much she loves the Eagles. She grew up with the Eagles and with Billy Joel. And she says their songs are, let's face it, incredible or be difficult and don't concede that point. It doesn't matter really. What matters is that you know them. Okay. So it's the argument from ubiquity. As adults drank beer and children capered in pools, this is growing up in Long Island, the Eagles' soft rock provided uneasy companionship. All the harmonies, honky-tonk men and scarlet women made me intuitively uncomfortable, but the songs were burned into my memory forever. 50 years after the Eagles' first release, they continue to exert a monolithic familiarity. For one thing, their infuriatingly precise mix of rock and roots essentially created the template for contemporary country music radio, with its brick-walled story songs and note-perfect ripping solos. Secondly, they have a way of turning up in the strangest contexts. And Big Lebowski is mentioned. Millennials might have first heard of California when Emergent Supernova. Frank Ocean is a supernova, is he? Sampled it on Nostalgia Ultra in 2011, a flattering occurrence to which Don Henley responded by referring to the culture-shifting ocean as, quote, a talentless little prick, unquote. That episode was not a discrete phenomenon. This has always been Henley and Frey's modus operandi. They are and always have been decidedly off-putting. Why are the Eagles the most unloved band to ever sell 100 million records? Where and when did all of this start? And is there any chance for this cognitive dissonance to be resolved? So she talked to radio legend and rock historian Tom Sharpling, treasured cultural critic Rob Sheffield, and celebrated singer-songwriter Will Sheff to re-examine the case against the Eagles. Charge number one, the dickishness. Perhaps the lawyers at the Ringer told her not to go too deeply into the Eagles, and particularly, Don Henley. I don't want to go too much into it for legal reasons. Just to say, Don Henley is lucky he is not in prison. The Eagles were a machine built on umbrage and limitless material gain. Unlike many bands who achieve dickishness in escalating proportion to their success, the Eagles seemingly needed no prompting. Almost immediately, their grievances were countless. They were mad at the press, their label, their publicists, concert promoters, fellow musicians, and one another. Their anger is a feature, not a bug. Punk rock never knew such pugnaciousness. And so they didn't like their first producer, Glyn Johns, who they said was too bossy. Tom Sharpley says, I think they knew the rap on them the whole time is that they're these pretty boys who are trading in the mythologies of country music and Americana, or whatever you want to call it, but they're just not legit. Their crushing insecurity is why they're dicks. An authenticity gap plagued the Eagles from the outset. The legendary Graham Parsons, whose sound the band slavishly aped, called them bubblegum in an interview shortly before his tragic death in 1973. No, it wasn't a tragic death as much as I love Graham Parsons. It was a typically stupid drug death. So Sharpling says they're not actually country music people. They're not cowboys. They're kind of just handsome guys who saw an opportunity to smash a couple of genres together with an eye towards the charts. The Eagles could confidently play with their shirts off. They were the shirtless birds. Yeah, okay. I don't really see that as any kind of definitive criticism. Okay, so they decided to meld genres. Okay, so they're fake. Okay. I don't care about any of that. I'll tell you what I care about. They're fake, and they pretended that they were authentic. Okay. David Bowie was fake. He was fake through and through. But he is English, or was English, and came from a show business tradition. He never made any fuss about being authentic. The major reason that he doesn't get into is that their songs are terrible. It's not just the lyrics either. Well, let's see. Will Sheff says, I always thought of the Eagles as the high school jocks who joined bands because they thought they could get laid or something. Well, if you want to see a funny version of that, you should watch Yacht Rock, which I'm going to plug again. You can find it on YouTube, and the episode where the Eagles decide to beat up Steely Dan. And Donald and Walter are portrayed in this. Well, Donald in particular, his hipster speak is so advanced that he needs an interpreter. And the Eagles relentlessly bully Steely Dan, including physically. Very amusing. Throughout the cascading successes of their charmed career, the Eagles improbably continued to nurse early grudges. They singled out critics for a punch-on-sight list and stewed over positive reviews. It is tempting to connect the dual animating impulses of aggrievement and ambition to a boomer generation that would, in 1994, usher in a new era of hard-right American politics. Groan. Boo, groan, hiss. That same year, the Eagles were planning one of their innumerous reunion tours with prices that would make Croesus blush. Charge number 2, The Inheritance. It's weird how much the Eagles bitch about LA. They seem to have thought that everybody in LA was born in LA. That's a strange criticism to make because the Eagles posed as Californians, but they are not from California. Glenn Frey is from Detroit, and Henley is from Florida. And, oh, yes, the Laurel Canyon scene. I don't want to talk about that. I don't know why that's in there. They're accused here of just following in the wake of Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. Witchy women. That is charge number 3. Rob Sheffield has always been annoyed by this. At least 90% of Eagles songs are telling a woman, you think you're really cool, but you're not. And I'm going to explain why by making a bunch of points that have certainly never occurred to you before. Actually, that's pretty good. This bothers me too, and it's weird because as a lady, I'm perfectly happy listening to AC/DC or the Stones or whatever, who have songs in which women are more or less constantly objectified and variously badgered. Well, if you're going to look at a song like Under My Thumb, that song is good. Not just because of the lyrics, but because how the music plays against the lyrics. You know, with the vibraphone and such like, and how cool it is. Yeah, but no, the Eagles lyrics are just terrible in all sorts of ways. Sheffield finds Lion Eyes risible. That song really, really bugs the shit out of me. The way it begins, like city girls just seem to find out early how to open doors with just a smile. It's like, excuse me, Glenn Frey, how the F do you open doors? Is it your brilliance? Charge number 4, innocence and experience. Okay. So you grow up in the radio, listening to the radio, says chef, and you like songs that you hear on the radio because they're on the radio. How old do you have to be before you grow out of that? Well, Chef has a personal beef with Don Henley because he covered the end of The Innocents and he wanted to make changes to the last verse. And the genius of Don Henley freaked out at that. There's very little about the music here. Oh, of course, you know, they are Eagles, not the Eagles, right? Don't call them the Eagles because why? Wikipedia calls them just Eagles. I first heard them in 1972 with their song Take It Easy, which of course was co-written by Jackson Browne, who later became a major annoyance in his own right. And I just thought, yeah, you guys, you're just so cool and laid back, and yet so calculating at the same time. Oh, and you're very well familiar with Winslow, Arizona. Are you? I don't believe it for a second. But it was to get worse. Desperado. Oh, so yeah, Bon Jovi did a similar thing. That. Oh, we're desperados. You guys are desperados? Again, I don't believe that for a second. Alice Cooper around that time and Killer had a song called Desperado. Now, of course, they're a rock band, but, Alice Cooper band was hated and feared by a lot of people. Nobody was ever afraid of the Eagles. I remember I spent a month in London in July 1976, and my local, as they say in England, was a pub on the Tottenham Court Road called the Duke of Wellington, as many English pubs were once called. And they played two records incessantly, and one of which was ABBA's Greatest Hits, Volume 1, and the Eagles' Greatest Hits, Volume 1. And to me, it was really heaven and hell. They play the ABBA record, and I'd be in a fine mood, and then they put the Eagles on, and I would think that everything in life is worthless. That's how much I hate the Eagles. Another thing that bothers me, they complained about Glyn Johns, but I've got a pretty good idea, what happened with this band, that the egos in this band were completely out of control. And when you get to Hotel California, the production, this is one of the worst sounding records I have ever heard. And I got a pretty good idea what happened is that various members of the band would sneak into the studio and double up their parts, add parts or whatever, or, use a fader to bring down someone else's part, or perhaps eliminate it entirely or whatever, because, their genius, their individual genius within the band had to be appreciated. And I think that Hotel California, the song, is one of the most pretentious things that I have ever heard. And people say that MacArthur Park is pretentious. No, MacArthur Park is, heartfelt. Hotel California, I mean, there's two songs about California, right? But the Eagles, they're just so very world weary, were they? Their experience, touring the world, making zillions of dollars, and playing to millions of adoring fans. Yes. Yeah, I can see the world weariness there. Let's see. Media Hit says Hotel California is a druggy occult dirge. Well, as I say, I think a lot of that has to do with the atrocious production, which may not be Bill Sicknick's fault, or the producer or the co-producer. It may not be his fault. MacArthur Park is bizarre, says Yo Mama. It is bizarre, and that is part of its charm. I mean, it's an extended metaphor. I mean, Jim Webb is, well, I dare to say this, Jim Webb is a genius, Didn't Henley flip out that Walsh was singing Desperado during Ringo's All-Star Tour? Why would it matter to Don Henley? Seriously. Why would it matter? He determines who gets to sing this song forever. That Joe Walsh, well, you weren't one of the original Eagles, and you were under my command. Let's talk about, oh, yes, we're on the subject of popular music. And this story, what just broke today, that Van Morrison is in the news again. This is from the Forward, a publication which I do not trust because about 20 years ago, they ran a hit piece on me. Yes, they did, where I was one of the worst people in the world. And it turned out that the article was written by David Radler's daughter. And it was obvious the whole thing was a stitch up right from the beginning, but I won't go into detail about that. This story by Lewis Keane. They own the media. New Van Morrison song amplifies anti-Semitic trope. Well, there's a problem with that. They. Oh, so when you hear the word they and it's something bad, you obviously think it must be us Jews. Why would you think that? You know, you see this all the time. Oh, some cartoon character, in one of these Pixar films or whatever. Oh, this character is a nasty character. Oh, and it's a fish or something. Well, it must be Jewish. Maybe it's just a fish, Legendary singer-songwriter Van Morrison released a new song on streaming platforms Thursday, whose title espouses a classic anti-Semitic trope. The lyrics of the song, They Own the Media, never indicate who the pronoun in its title refers to. But Morrison, a two-time Grammy winner, was also accused of anti-Semitism for his 2005 track, They Sold Me Out, and throughout the coronavirus pandemic has been trafficked in conspiracy theories that frequently overlap with Jew hatred. Oh, I get it. So Van Morrison is a COVID skeptic, so he is ex officio anti-Semitic. Yeah, you heard of this fellow called Alex Berenson? Last time I checked, Berenson was a Jewish name, and he is one of the most prominent COVID skeptics of all. The album raised eyebrows in March when its song list was revealed, including titles such as Why Are You on Facebook, Big Lie, Stop Bitching, Do Something. On the website Stereogram, writer Tom Brahan called out They Own the Media, saying it sure seems to be an anti-Semitic trope. Maybe it's satire, he wrote. Maybe the they of the title doesn't refer to any specific group of people. But when you consider that this man just went on a months-long COVID-denying tantrum, we have every right to be suspicious about this one. Yeah, so smashing the economy and destroying society, that anyone who would object to that, that's a tantrum. And they deal in conspiracy theories and are almost certainly anti-Semitic. And on the website InsideHook.com, Bonnie Sternberg noted that even if it's not relying on old anti-Semitic stereotypes, the idea that any singular group of people owns the media is a dangerous myth. Oh, it's a dangerous myth. Is it? Has this woman ever looked into a media concentration in the United States around the world, that an ever smaller number of companies now owns everything? How about that ATT merger? How about Disney buying Fox? I mean, in my own country, how about Rogers buying Shaw? There were a lot of people in my country who, got their cable and their internet from Shaw, largely because they didn't want to deal with Rogers. And now it appears Shaw customers, such as myself, will no longer have that option. No, but to talk about media concentration is obviously anti-Semitic. Oh, yeah, let's go on about the protocols of the elders of Zion. Okay, and finally, before we move on to the book club, a man who is as modest as Don Henley is a megalomaniac, Bjorn Ulvaeus of ABBA. He really is a genuinely modest man. I saw a documentary about the website Mamma Mia, which is, of course, based on ABBA songs. And they showed Bjorn checking into a hotel in London because he was, checking in on his property, the London production. And he stayed at a little boutique hotel. And he came just by himself, with no handlers, no security. It was quite refreshing to see. This is from, and where does the story originally come from? The New York Times, okay. Will songwriting survive streaming? ABBA's Bjorn Ulvaeus is worried. In ABBA, Bjorn Ulvaeus tasted the highest reaches of musical fame, selling millions of albums that defined earworm 1970s pop and remain an inextricable part of the pop culture fabric. Somewhere around the world, at least in normal times, a wedding reception is always bopping to Take a Chance on Me on Dancing Queen. A key part of ABBA's success and the wealth of Ulvaeus and his writing partner, Benny Andersson, was its songwriting, and in recent years, Ulvaeus has become an outspoken advocate for songwriters. Last year, he became president of SISAC, an umbrella organization for copyright collection societies around the world. Ulvaeus, like many others, is worried that the streaming economy that now dominates the music industry has put songwriters at a severe financial disadvantage. Low payouts, split among teams of writers, mean that even the composers of major hits make a relative pittance from streams, despite the clear importance of songwriters and producers in crafting the material that propels the careers of star performers. But of course, you don't need 9 producers to come up with a 3-minute, 9 writers, and God knows how many producers to come up with a 3-minute song. Do you? Last month, Media Research, which specializes in music and digital media, released a study rebalancing the song economy that was commissioned by Ulvaeus. It includes some surprising findings. In a survey, twice as many streaming users said a song mattered to them more than the artist who performed it rather than the opposite, and sounds an alarm about the need to reform the economics of streaming to better support songwriters. In conversation, Ulvaeus grinned widely when reminiscing about his creative process, promising with tantalizing little detail that new ABBA songs would be coming this fall. Well, I'm looking forward to that. Ulvaeus says the pandemic has put the focus on the plight of the songwriter. Suddenly, the artists were in the same situation. Their only income was suddenly just streaming. My God, I can't live on this. I can't pay the rent. And we songwriters said, hey, welcome to the world of songwriters. That's what it's like for us. So it's time for change. He's asked if songwriters are unable to make a real living from streaming, what's going to happen if this problem is not fixed? Everyone is going to find out that more of the songwriters have turned to driving Ubers instead of songwriting. There will be a lot of do-it-yourself people, but people with long careers, that is going to be very, very difficult in the current climate. Well, here's pretty much what happened. That the music companies, of which there are fewer and fewer and fewer, there's like 3, they call them the big 3 now. They just decided that songwriters and the people who make the records, they were getting too much money. Simple as that. And the money that they were getting weren't going in to the behemoth's pocket. So something had to be done about that, hence streaming. Now, all sorts of singers have been basically forced onto Spotify and the like. With, if you're not on the streaming services, then you don't exist anymore. I think it was foolish of them to accede to this. I mean, it's still possible to put out CDs, and to charge people for those. And it's still possible to, sell your own recordings, albums worth or track by track. Oh, but no, you need to be with Apple or Amazon or such like. Do you? Do you really? I mean, it really seems that the music industry became enraged because people who were not businessmen were getting wealthy from making music. Well, despite despite the internet, despite torrenting, not that very many people actually torrent songs. There's still an enormous amount of money to be made in the music business, but the musicians and the songwriters are making very little of it. So, before I go to the book club, let's go to the chat. Media Hit says you better learn some marketing. Your producers or labels won't look out for you. Maybe the label will during the first album. Well, yes, the record labels made it clear. Quite some time ago, they made, bands, people signed 360 contracts, right? They wanted a cut of touring revenue. Can you imagine that? And they basically put it to them, oh, you can't depend on our publicity department anymore, because we're expecting you to be the primary publicists of the records that you make for us. The logical response to that would be, why do we pay you then? Why are we working with you? Mediahead says albums don't exist anymore. Yeah, in a way they don't. I mean, people still buy them complete. I will have to listen to KMG's Eagles Roundup on playback, says Pitsky. Well, it'll sound just as good, Cardi B is anti-Semitic AF, LOL, says De Boreas. Yes, she is, but she's at the top of the intersectional totem pole. Is she not? She's not just a black woman. She used to be a sex worker. Okay. And Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman say do it, according to Media Hits. Okay. Morrison is a drunk Irish anti-Semite, says Media Hits. I know that Van Morrison has been renowned. There are many, many stories. The rudest man in show business, certainly the rudest, uncontested rudest since Lou Reed died. Oh, it's all good. We are having Music Monday today. No, we had Music Monday on Tuesday, but there will be another Music Monday on Monday while I will be talking about Syd Barrett. Media Head says, are you shocked or surprised Henley's ego is sky high over an old song being performed by an old member, not affecting anyone's royalties? I don't know. The guy's just a dink. That's all I can say. That's all I can say. But let's talk about Rome, because that is the subject of the book on the book club today. And just let me bring up the links. We'll just take a minute. The book is by Tom Holland, and it is called Dynasty. It is a sequel to his book Rubicon, which I reviewed some time ago, I believe when I was doing this with Luke Ford. And what do we know about Tom Holland? Well, I can tell you off the top that Tom Holland's books sell very well. He was educated at Cambridge and Oxford, but he's not a professional historian. And this really rubs a lot of people the wrong way, Jealousy is what it is. And I noticed this in the Guardian review, one of the Guardian reviews of his book, which was very amusing, But the book, I want to give you the full title of the book, which is Dynasty, the Rise and Fall of the House of Caesar. And hang on. Oh, yes. Emily Wilson. And who is Emily Wilson when she's at home? She is, the author of Seneca, which is published by Alan Lane. This is an old gag that newspapers and the magazines do, which is that someone publishes a book on such and such a subject, and so they hire a reviewer who has written a book on that exact same subject or in that same realm, who says, oh, this person has no idea what he's on about, etc. Incredibly, this review, Dynasty by Tom Holland, the soap opera version of history. Golly, there was nothing very soap opera-ish about the Roman Empire, was there? I have read dozens of books about the Roman Empire, but one of the problems I had with Dynasty is that marriage was about alliances then. So divorce was common, and divorce was common for dynastic reasons. Also, adoption was common for dynastic reasons. And so you're reading about these people, and who is this person the son of? Natural son or adopted son of? Who is this person's mother? There seem to be an awful lot of Julias about. You know, let's look at Tiberius, the infamous Tiberius. That Livia was not only Tiberius's mother, she was his stepmother. Yeah, wrapped your head around that. But according to Emily Wilson, orgies, sadism, matricide, this overblown account is ancient Rome for the age of Donald Trump. Oh, is there a lot of matricide in the Trump era? So were orgies, sadism, and matricide common to the Julio-Claudians? Yes, indeed they were. Almost routine. Let's see, he tells a similar story, of Dynasty, the TV series from the 1980s. An obscenely wealthy, overprivileged, and self-upset set of people, always dressed in peculiar and expensive clothes, who devoted their lives to shoring up their own wealth and power while scheming against one another and behaving in an entertainingly terrible way. Tom Holland tells a very similar story in a similarly overblown style. Was Suetonius overblown? Yeah. Yes. See, Holland's book has the advantage of being entertaining. Very entertaining indeed. I see that some people have called the writing, too highbrow. Well, it's not academic writing, and academic writing is boring. It's boring by choice. It is imposed on academics that their writing be boring. But Holland is really good. She concludes, the original Dynasty was a show for the era of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, which fed into a tangle of emotions about 1980s capitalism. Viewers were required to feel a mixture of envy, horror, fascination, and admiration for beautiful Joan Collins, her wicked ways, and her much emulated fashions. Oh, that was new, was it? Holland's book likewise invites us to put ourselves in the sandals of Nero and Caligula, and assumes that if we let ourselves off the hook with a dash of sarcasm, we will want to do so as if signing up to be their apprentices. Depressingly enough, this is ancient Rome for the age of Donald Trump. This is just absolutely atrocious. Absolutely atrocious review that apparently Tom Holland has made a history interesting. You know, I think it would be difficult to write about the Julio-Claudians and be boring, but I'm sure it has been achieved. Now, Holland begins his book with a rather potted history of the history of Rome itself, up to Julius Caesar, who, of course, was the adoptive father of Octavian, who later became Augustus. And he reminds us, of course, of the birth of Rome, the fabled birth of Rome, with Romulus and Remus, who were suckled by a she-wolf. And, of course, he makes much of the wolfishness in Roman legend and in Roman reality. At the beginning of the book, there's a long passage where Holland considers the Pax Romana and the benefits it brought to the world. And of course, that is one way to look at it. I mean, that's the Roman way to look at it. The famed historian Tacitus, quoting Caldwell, who was a Caledonian enemy of Rome, said this famously: "These plunderers of the world, after exhausting the land by their devastations, are rifling the ocean, stimulated by avarice, if their enemy be rich, by ambition if poor, unsatiated by the East and the West, the only people who behold wealth and indigence with equal avidity, to ravage, to slaughter, to usurp under false titles, they call empire, and where they make a desert, they call it peace." We have a similar complaint from Henrietta Elizabeth Marshall, who is the author of An Island Story, A History of England for Boys and Girls, which for several generations was read by pretty much every English school boy and girl. In chapter 2, The Coming of the Romans, she writes that the Romans were a very powerful people. They called themselves the masters of the world. It is true they were very clever. They had taught themselves how to fight, how to make swords and armor, and how to build fortresses better than any of the peoples who lived then. So it happened that the Romans generally won the victory over all who fought against them. But they were a very greedy people, and as soon as they heard of a new country, they wanted to conquer it and call it part of the Roman Empire. Now, one is drawn inescapably reading previous book Rubicon and this one Dynasty, as well as, say, in reading Alan Massey's novels about the Julio-Claudians. I highly commend them to you. Of the correspondence between the Roman Republic at the moment of its crisis and the situation of the United States today. Is it possible to be an empire, a global empire, at the same time remaining a republic? I think that it is difficult at best. I mean, Tiberius, according to Hollander, desperately wanted to keep at least the outward signs of the republic. But an empire requires a military dictatorship. So it seems to me. And what is the nature? What is the nature of this? What is the nature of, Rome's power, ultimately? There's a lot about Horace and Ovid, the two great poets in Hollander's work. He writes about how Ovid was, who famously wrote or infamously wrote The Art of Love, many other satires, that he offended the sexual morality of the Romans, of which more later. He was exiled to the Black Sea, to a town that was then called Thomas, which is now in Romania and is a leading vacation spot. He did not like it much. Ovid was appalled to find himself in Thomas. It was very much not his kind of town. Planted centuries earlier by Greek colonists on the bleak and gale-lashed coast of the Black Sea, it stood on the outermost limits of Roman power. Even though Ovid was exaggerating grotesquely when he complained that Thomas was one perpetual winter, the reality of its balmy summers did little to ease his mood of depression. It was hard to imagine a town less like Rome. The water was brackish, the food was appalling, no one spoke Latin, and even the Greek spoken by the Tomitans struck Ovid as halfway too gibberish. Surrounded as he was by treeless desolation, the pleasures of the world's capital shimmered in his memory like hallucinations. Here, he reflected mournfully, it is I who am the barbarian. To Ovid, a man as fashionable as anyone in Rome, it came as a shock to live among provincials who did not even realize that they were provincial. Within the low, crumbling fortifications of Thomas, there was no one to share with him his anguished homesickness for metropolitan chic. Beyond its walls, things were even more savage. The Danube, which lay some 70 miles to the north, featured on the maps of Caesar and his strategists as an immense natural frontier, a wide-flowing impediment to the brutes who lurked beyond it, but on the ground, things were alarmingly different. During winter, when even the sea beyond the delta might turn to ice, the river would freeze solid and then mounted on swift ponies, their beards white with frost. Barbarians from the savage wastes beyond the Danube would appear, predacious and unsparing. Plumes of smoke wisping above the sunless horizon would mark villages put to the torch, bodies left twisted by poisoned arrows, their survivors tethered and driven off with their belongings. In his nightmares, Ovid would imagine himself dodging missiles or else shackled in a coffle, and wake to find the rooftops bristling with a stubble of arrows. Looking out of the war bands as they circled the walls of Thomas, he would find himself penned inside a sheepfold. Rome seemed not merely distant, but impotent. For all her beauties, the vast majority of mankind barely registers her existence. It was, for a man as devoted to the metropolis as Ovid, a devastating discovery to make. They do not fear the armed might of the Romans. The Romans believed that they had the right to conquer the entire world and to make it Roman, to make it civilized. Now, conquest by the Romans, you can see this to this day. You look at the parts of Europe that were conquered by the Romans and the parts that were not conquered by Romans, and you see very different attitudes and cultures. Specifically, or particularly, you look at the parts of Germany that were captured by the Romans and the parts that were not. But, I look at our present day, that the United States believes that it has the right to, if not conquer, then to dominate the rest of the world. And those parts of the world that do not want to be dominated by the United States are the enemy of the United States. And the people who, from different cultures, who do not want to be part of the global American culture, which is a travesty of traditional American culture, well, they're barbarians, aren't they? Everyone should speak English. I'm sure you all know that the Greeks referred to people who spoke in tongues they did not understand as barbarians because their language sounded like bar, bar, bar. But how similar our own times are. So, Hollander writes with regard to Ovid in exile at Thomas. Perhaps it was only out on the margins of civilization, far from the flesh pots of the capital, that a man could properly appreciate just how far the Roman people had come since those distant days, and what qualities were that had made possible their rise to greatness. Ovid, exiled to a frontier zone just recently and precariously brought under the rule of law, was having his metrosexual nose rubbed by the princeps, that would be Augustus, in a brutal fact. There could be no arts of peace without a mastery of war. It was not, in the final reckoning, good drains or gleaming temples, let alone a taste for poetry, that distinguished a civilized man from a savage, but steel. The steel it took to stand shield to shield in a line of battle and then advance. Wolf-bred though a Roman was, his proficiency at inflicting slaughter was not that of a wild beast. Training, rigid and relentless, had forged him into a single link in a mighty chain. A soldier was not permitted to marry. His comrades were all he had. A legion was less a pack of animals than it was a killing machine. Soldiers worshipped Mars as Gradivus, the god who gave them the courage to advance step by measured step, obedient to the blasts of the war trumpet no matter what the danger. Against the relentless heavy tread, there was little prospect of victory. Even the wildest, most bloodthirsty warband, when it charged a legion, was liable to break in the end. Unlike the savages from across the Danube, always descending like birds when least expected. A Roman army was schooled in endurance. Its soldiers had been trained, no matter what, to eviscerate a foe, advance, and then, covered in blood, to eviscerate again. Had they not been, then their aptitude for inflicting slaughter on those who dared to oppose them would never have become so potent. It is discipline, strict military discipline, that is the surest guardian of Roman power. And that is a quotation from Valerius Maximus. And reading that paragraph gave me pause when I read that the Joint Chiefs of Staff, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, says that America's secret, what makes the American military great, is not discipline, it is diversity. And reading that sounded like a death knell for the American empire to me. Oh yes, we have the finest pregnant Marines in the world in the United States Army. These people seem to have forgotten what warfare is about. It's about slaughter, as the Romans well knew. How did America conquer a continent? How did it achieve its military victories? How did it beat down the Japanese? What, in a little over 3 years, conquering thousands of miles of territory through slaughter? There's a great deal in this work about, as I say, the mores of the Romans. And it's complicated because Roman mores, they were pagans, of course, the Romans, but they had a very strict morality. They might, to give one example, fathers had the absolute right, ownership of their children. And ownership means the right to destroy. And so after a birth, there would be a decision of several days. The child had no name, and whether it would be put out, exposed to death if it wasn't wanted. That was perfectly normal with the Romans. On the other hand, adultery was severely frowned upon, and Augustus actually made it illegal. That even before Augustus's new laws, his codification of traditional Roman morality, that cuckoldry was regarded with horror. That a man who discovered his wife on the job with another man, well, the husband had the right to kill his wife on the spot. Whether he had the right to kill the man doing the cuckolding, well, that was there was some dispute about that. Augustus, he liked to sleep around, and curiously, the Romans saw this as effeminate. You know, what sort of man would leap from woman to woman to woman like that? You know, what does he have to prove? Augustus was seen, well, some things about Augustus. Augustus is regarded, I suppose, wrongly, as one of the great military men of our time. Augustus had a horror of war, although he had been involved in it from a very early age. But he was frequently to be found vomiting, you know, outside his tent. He had a great general, Agrippa, and later his adopted son, Tiberius, a great general. But I suppose, you know, one of the many things, complimentary things you could say about Augustus was that he was quite good at picking a talent. This is a man who came to the mastery of the greatest empire that certainly the Western world had ever seen. And how did he do it? Through terrorism. This is the word Holland uses, and there is no other way to describe it. That during the civil wars that racked Rome after the assassination of Caesar, Augustus got to the top by being more savage than any of them. Wholesale murder, wholesale proscription, and with the seizure of the estates of the aristocrats. And then later, his victorious armies would return to Italy. And what did they want? They wanted land. Well, of course, there's only so much land to go around. And so how did they get their land? It was stolen from the rightful owners. And these men were left penniless and homeless. But the soldiers had to be given their payoff. Later, after Augustus had enriched the treasury of Rome, he was able to give soldiers land by buying out the rightful owners. So I suppose there's a phrase associated with Augustus, which is used in Holland's book as to what happened. How did Augustus change? How did a man who was associated with murder and rapine become associated with peace? Well, the phrase is, Seneca said, "I'm reluctant to call mercy what was really the exhaustion of cruelty." That as, unlike, say, Stalin, as Augustus grew older, I guess he just didn't have the bottle to kill people as he had in the past. Of course, Augustus was seen, well, as the father of the nation, not just Caesar Imperator, but, the very title of Augustus. Every honor was given him, and he was seen as a god before his death, and then formally became a god. Although Holland notes that upon Augustus's death, with Tiberius in attendance, that Tiberius was shocked when he was greeted with the news of the assassination of Agrippa Postumus, another one of the Julio Claudians, and a grandson of Livia. And Tiberius said that this matter will have to be brought to the Senate. And it was impressed upon him, probably by his mother, that no, because if Tiberius hadn't ordered the death of Agrippa Postumus, then there were only two people who could have done so. That would have been Augustus himself or his wife, Livia. There's a great deal in this book about symbolism. The Romans were famously superstitious, of course, given much to auguries and portents. But one is really impressed in Dynasty by the power of symbolism to unite a people. We all seem to regard symbolism as a joke. Why would we need symbolism? Why would we need ancient traditions and symbols? Well, Roman emperors and Roman leaders for hundreds of years worried that the Romans were losing their Romanness. Now, of course, Rome was a multinational, multicultural, multilingual empire. And so can one really speak of Rome when one discusses the Roman Empire? But the Romans had their traditions going back to Romulus and Remus. And they had their many temples. They had their many sacred objects. And Augustus and Tiberius and others were determined that the Romans not lose this, that it not become a joke to them, as it was to, say, Ovid, that if they were to lose this, if they were to lose their ability of veneration, their capacity for veneration, then it would all fall apart. And I think that this is a extremely powerful argument, that the idea of collectivity of any kind doesn't seem to exist in the Western world anymore. We're all just atoms, in a stochastic universe. And I don't really think that is I don't think that that is sustainable. But going back to the sexual morality of the Romans, I told you the horror of adultery, that, well, fornication, that was reserved for lower people, for slaves, for whores, for actresses. You know, the Romans, they knew their business about that. Let's see. I'll read some more from the book. This question of the wife caught in flagrante. So one famously stern moralist had ruled might be murdered on the spot. Yes, the threat of violent, savage, and potentially murderous hung over every adulterous contact. Or did it? There was perhaps, for those up to speed with the times, something just a little bit provincial, just a little bit musty about an antique sexual taboo. How like a rustic to get upset when your wife cheats on you. So Ovid, a man with his finger on the pulse of high society, observed with practiced smoothness. Yet if the cuckold who kicked up the fuss was a boor, then so too was the one who failed to spoil sport. Well, you know, under Augustus's sexual code, if it appeared that the cuckolded man was not dishonored enough by this, he could be tried as a pimp. Holland continues, the various prohibitions and perils erected by custom in the path of the adulterer were liable to strike the seasoned connoisseur of erotic pleasure less as deterrents than as incentives, spicing up the fun. We always want what we're not allowed. Ovid, in offering this sage observation, was putting his finger on a mocking truth. Forbidden fruit tasted the sweetest. Prohibitions, trust me, only encourage bad behavior. This, in a city as addicted to gossip as Rome, was a paradox that plenty were prepared to swallow. Speculation as to what might be going on in the city's most exclusive bedrooms naturally transfixed the public. That adultery was regarded by the upper classes as one tremendous game in which the rules were there to be broken, and the measure of cool was to smuggle a lover into the marital bed, was widely taken for granted. No smoke without fire, after all. Proofs of the adulterous and effeminate behavior of Rome's fast set were everywhere to be seen. In the dandyish, loose way they wore their togas, in their clean nails, sprucely clipped nasal hair, and sinister lack of body odor. Above all, in the oiled sheen of their limbs. Does that not sound like men today? For a man to shave his armpits was, everyone could agree, simply good manners, but to do as Augustus was said to have done, and depilate the legs, was disgusting, plain and simple. Body hair was the mark of a man. Everyone knew, though, that adulterers cared nothing for that. Smooth skin, not a pelt, was what they brought to seduction. It was almost deviant and alarming. Even Ovid might sometimes be provoked to pontificate. Men are all such fashion victims these days that really we can hardly blame women for feeling the pressure. I like this book a very great deal. You know, Harry Truman famously said, there's nothing new in life except the history you don't know. And I learned a lot from Tom Holland's book, and I found it very thought-provoking. And it is exceedingly well written. It is not too dry, and it is not too coarse. It finds that happy medium. So those are my thoughts on it. Enron says, I don't know much about the subject, but I hope there are more balanced accounts of Augustus than Holland's. Well, it is a very balanced account because Holland points out in great detail what an outstanding politician Augustus was. Constantly disdaining power, saying, no, I'm not worthy. And then, you know, the Senate would beg him to take up, you know, all of these positions until he had practically all of them. And living a modest life and pretending he wasn't interested, you know, in immortalization, even as his image appeared in thousands of places throughout the empire. And he compares him to Tiberius. Tiberius was stiff-necked, was the word used about him. He was genuinely embarrassed by these displays of awe directed at him. He had no interest in glory. His only interest was in serving Rome and in serving Augustus. So let's take a final look at the chat. According to Claudius, Livia was profoundly devious. She comes off a very good account in Holland's book, but of course he talks about the gossip among her that you see. Similarly, I've said before how the neocons, Richard Pearl, they were given full reign to investigate the Soviet Union. This is the Soviet Union preparing for first strike on the United States. And they came back with the alarming conclusion, yes. Well, how do you know this? Because there's no evidence of it. Yeah, the precautionary principle. There's no evidence of it, so it must be true. That's how devious they are. And this is what the Romans said of Livia. Oh, that she is the perfect matron. She is the mother of Rome. That she is always exact in everything. And this proves that she's a poisoner. Shaving is gay, says Aslan. Well, I went to London Drugs a few weeks ago. I needed a new electric razor, and I saw this vast array of depilation devices for men. There were dozens of them, and I said, "Are any of these, electric razors? I just want to shave my face." And the woman said, "No, there's around the corner." You mean all of these are for, grooming, like grooming the body? All of them? I mean, it's some of them, sideburns and, how to get that perfect stubble and all that sort of thing. But no, a lot of them are simply for, shaving the hair on your legs and around your genitals and such like. Kevin is an aviary. Says Chogokin 666. Oh, that's the effect of these hideous coverlets, or whatever you want to call them. Anyway, that's the show for today and this week. And what is coming up next week? Well, on Music Monday, I'm going to be talking about Syd Barrett, one of my favorites. May 17th, I'm going to be talking about a man who I used to idolize, but now do not. I'm going to be talking about the Glenn Gould cult. On May the 24th, I'm going to be talking about a band I've been listening to an awful lot lately because I'd always liked them, but it never really occurred to me just how good they were. 10cc, Art for Art's Sake, Money for God's Sake. On May the 31st, I'm going to be talking about Bill Drummond of the KLF and the famous 1 million pounds that was taken on a tour of Britain. On the book club next week, I'm going to be talking about Cultured Grugs by John Chapman. May the 21st, The Lullaby of Polish Girls, a novel by the actress Dagmara Dominczyk. On May the 28th, Rush's American Pilgrim. And on June the 4th, a dystopian novel by Stanley Bing called Immortal Life. On Theater Thursday next week, I'm talking about a film from Japan called House, 1977. A very 1970s movie on May the 20th. Obviously, the kind of movie that hasn't been made, well, probably since the 1970s. The Friends of Eddie Coyle, directed by Peter Yates. On May 27th, a movie about manhood and what it means by Carol Reed, 1948. The Fallen Idol. And on June the 3rd, a film about Sir and St. Thomas More, Fred Zinnemann's 1966 A Man for All Seasons. I'll be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all for tuning in. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which would be exceedingly appreciated, considering where I live and how I don't want to live here any longer, I've been here since a week before Christmas. My PayPal account is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada and wish to make a donation to the live stream, this can be done directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this benediction. During these times of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.